नमस्ते एंड सुप्रभात। जो आज का टाइटल है, it's a little blasphemous when you come to art and try to define it, because a lot of artists, great artists, would say this is a stupid exercise in itself. This is like explaining a joke or describing the beauty of a painting in words. So it's futile and it destroys the beauty. But in an era in which everything is being called art and claimed as art, we have to put some definitions on art. V.S. Ramachandran, one of the greatest neuroscientists, in his book, very famous book, Phantoms in the Brain, he writes that, of course, art, the definition of art is very wide. Of course, a lot of things can be included in art. Of course, it doesn't give itself to defining as science does. But that doesn't mean anything can be called art, and he uses a sentence, you cannot distort it anyway and call it art, although many in California, where I come from, do. So this is what's happening. That's why we need still more. What is art? Because today, in the era in which I was born also, when we grew up, and the contemporary modern art that we saw, it defied all boundaries. So, and the kind of bluff that you encountered when you tried to critique those pieces of art was what geared me that really there should be some way to define art, at least from the Indic point of view. For example, I went to this exhibition once, and there was a very big canvas, white. Beach mein there was a small cross, not red, just black cross, itna chota sa. So there was no art in it. Of course, anyone can cross it in the middle. And so the artist there was standing to explain, in this world of negativity, we have this positive, we have to exude this positive vibes from inside, yet it's hopeless. That's why the black cross and all. He had to stand there and explain it all. मैंने कहा भाई लिख ही देता. There was no need to call it painting and make it on a wall and call it painting. So in that sense, and it might be the subject of a different lecture, how it came to be. There are certain very good channels on Twitter and on other social media handles also, who compare today's art with what used to be 250, 300 years ago, or 300 or 400 years ago. Okay? How did we come from that stage to this? For example, if you go to Delhi and National Museum of Art, the kind of artifacts that you see outside, and what we have created, we know what the temples that we have created, the paintings that we have created, the sculpture that we have created, how did we come from that stage to this stage? So it's very necessary today, what is the Indic concept of art, because the artists today who stand in the galleries in Bangalore and in Delhi and Hyderabad, and they will tell you that we are also Indian artists, this is also Indian art. That is not so. Just like yesterday, we tried to define Indic identity, what it means to be Indian, what it means to be Indic. That's similarly, we have to define what it means to be Indic art. If you call something Indic, if you call that art, then it has to have a certain definition. So that's how we proceed. What is art? Let us begin with Sri Aurobindo. I shudder most of the times to begin with Sri Aurobindo because of 37 volumes. I do have all of them. I haven't read, of course, most of them. So, and because everything that Sri Aurobindo has said in one place, there seems to be something counter in his own work somewhere else. So if you marshal a quote from somewhere, without having read the entire 37 volumes, I hear there is 38th now. So, and then there is a threat that some Aurobindonian sitting there in the audience will come up with another quote and say, you are wrong. This is what he wrote, and like they can even trace chronology. This he said later, that he said earlier, so this abrogates that. So I am usually afraid, but this is, I take it from the authority of Sri Kumaraswamy. What I am going to quote, another Kumaraswamy, because him I have read almost every word that he has ever written, and he has marshaled this. So I am taking it on second authority, but this is an absolutely wonderful quote of Sri Aurobindo on what is Western art, what is the Western concept of art, and what is the Indic concept of art. So the Western mind is arrested, and he's just commenting on the Western art here. The Western mind is arrested and attracted by the form. He's commenting mostly not just on contemporary Western art, he's also commenting on ancient classical Greek art, mind you. That beautiful, those Greek sculptures, he's commenting on that also. The Western mind is arrested and attracted by the form, lingers on it and cannot get away from its charm, loves it for its own beauty, loves it for its own. These words are important because that's where we will proceed and from and to. Loves it for its own beauty, rests on the emotional, intellectual and aesthetic suggestions that arise directly from its most visible language. Confines the soul in the body. It might almost be said that for this mind form creates the spirit depends for its existence and for everything it has to say on the form. So he's saying it's very peripheral. Sathi hai. It's of course aesthetics, of course beautiful, but it doesn't get more than that. And Kumaraswamy, today we have, and we mostly use the word aesthetic in a very positive sense, but Kumaraswamy, if you read his work, he uses it also in a negative sense, in the sense that it's very material. When you use the word aesthetic, it is very material. If it doesn't have a greater meaning, if it just is beautiful, then from an Indian concept, it is not art. So that's where we will proceed from. So Western art, of course, this is one of the most famous creations in Western art, and it is beautiful, there is no doubt about that. They have created some of the most beautiful pieces that we have ever encountered in human history. In early history of Hindu sculpture also, the Gandharan art was also largely influenced by the Greek art, and you can see those very realistic forms, realistic bodies that are depicted. So Western art, classical Western art. And then Sri Aurobindo says, contrasts it with the Indian attitude. The Indian attitude to the matter is at the opposite pole to this view, from this peripheral, surface level view of beauty. The Indian mind, form does not exist except as a creation of the spirit. So the other way around, a spirit does not evolve from the form, actually form descends from the spirit. Creation of the spirit and draws all its meaning and value from the spirit. This characteristic attitude of the Indian reflective and creative mind necessitates, in our view, of its creations an effort to get beyond at once to the inner spirit of the reality it expresses and see from it and not from outside. So inner spirit of reality, the artist takes you to the Chitta Bhumi in which he is, that any artist does, even a Western artist would do. But here, an artist who is in the higher states of consciousness himself, by doing constant yoga, I will discuss about that, he will take you to that inner higher level of consciousness, which is inside, which is not outside. So that's how Indian art is different. So if you would see this, and still some novices, and when the British came, they had this objection about Indian art. You have no knowledge of anatomy. You have no knowledge, Indian art is not realistic. They are incapable of drawing realistic figures because there are no abs, no biceps, no triceps, no tresses in the dress. And look at this, how can someone have 16 or 18 hands? This is grotesque. And these are the words that they have used in their initial critics, grotesque Hindu art, because 16 hands, 18 hands, impossible poses and postures. And so they just cannot understand it. But as we'll go through the presentation, we'll know what really this means. And then he ends here. When it comes to the Indian art, here the only right way is to get at once through a total intuitive or revelatory impression or by some meditative dwelling on the whole, dhyana. In the technical Indian team, to the spiritual meaning and atmosphere, make ourselves one with that as completely as possible, and then only the helpful meaning and value of all the rest come out with a complete and revealing force. So Sahridayata, जो हमने कल बात की थी, it makes you Sahriday, it brings you, Sahriday का meaning, it's very technical, but here for our purposes, when the chitta of the viewer is at the same level where the chitta of the artist is, that is called that Sahridayata. आप एक स्तर पर आ गए, and the artist can take you to the meaning which he has implemented here. Kapila Vasan, one of the greatest critics of art, she says, for the traditional Indian artist, artistic creation was the supreme means of realizing the universal being. Now this is a very definitive statement about Indian art, we cannot get away from this. For the traditional Indian artist, artistic creation was the supreme means of realizing the universal being. Art was a discipline, sadhana, a yoga, and a sacrifice, yajna. So this is what Indian art is. This is, and she is not 400 years old or 600 years old. She is not writing in 1200, 1400. She just passed away, I guess, a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, and she is writing it here in very contemporary times. So now we will try to extract 3 basic principles of what Indian art is. First, it has to be beautiful. Even at the very surface level, the aesthetic quotient has to be there. It cannot be ugly. Bibhats is a ras, but it also transports you to a different level. It is not without meaning. We will understand, we have the concept of Bibhats, but Bibhats also is not what passes on for art today at many places. So it has to be beautiful. What goes on the left and what goes on the right, they are not the same things. You cannot equate them and say both are art. One is beautiful and one is not. So V.S. Ramachandran, a scientist, would very definitely say there are certain neurons in our brain which fire when we perceive something beautiful, and that's common, that's universal to all human beings. So it's not very subjective. The subjective part is also there, but 60% of the perception of what's beautiful arises because our genetics, our brain is already primed to see something as beautiful and something as not. So that's embedded, that's not entirely subjective. And he has done experiments. He has said that make 100 people sit and wire their brains with all of these machines and show them. He showed them modern art, he showed them classical art, and it was very clear what was beautiful and what was not. So the first principle is there, it has to be beautiful, the aesthetic quotient has to be there. Second, that which is meaningful. Now, beauty, if it doesn't carry you anywhere, if it just leaves you there, what was the first quote that we read from Sri Aurobindo? If it's just beautiful and it leaves you there, okay, it's beautiful. For example, there is a male or a female figure who is very beautiful, beautiful dresses that they are wearing, and you can see the tresses in the dresses, like in the Greek art, a lot of Greek art you can say. So I'm not commenting on whole of Greek art, on only the realistic Greek art, which became more popular after Christianity went there, because that was what Christianity could perceive. Anything which did not fit their theology, grotesque figures, animal and human figures combined, they just could not understand those figures, and they eliminated that art from their critics. They destroyed it and eliminated it. So what passes off as Greek art, the critic of Greek art today that we read, is mostly a Christian, it passes through the Christian sieve. And so they have eliminated what is not according to their sensibility, and they have kept only what they could understand. So it has to be meaningful. Now you see here, this is from Rani Ki Vav in Gujarat, one of the most beautiful places that you will ever go to for viewing Hindu sculpture in north. Solankis created some of the most beautiful vigrahas anywhere that you can see on the walls in north. So in south you will see, of course, Pallavas, of course, Hoysalas, but in the north, Solankis, I don't think we have surpassed Solankis in Chandela. Solankis in, and in many views, I guess Solankis are even better than Chandelas, better even than Khajuraho sculpture. So here you see, there are many hands of the goddess. She is in the process of killing Mahishasura. And Mahishasura, here you see, the Asura is emerged from his animal form. So she is killing that only. And there are many ayodhas. Ayodhas are the weapons. And the more deeper meaning is that which you wield. So it can even be a book. So when you see the Vigraha of Saraswati and there is a book in her hand, that's also an ayodha. So ayodha does not just mean a weapon, or if you can see book as a weapon, then of course it's also a weapon. So all of these ayodhas that she holds, all of them have meaning. The pose that she strikes, that has a meaning. Nothing here is arbitrary. Everything has a meaning. The prabhavali, the abhavali, that वो जो पीछे circle जो आपको दिख रहा है, everything has a meaning. Everything is coded there for you to decode. And in the process of that coding and decoding, you are supposed to, if you are that pure, if your chitt is that pure, if you have done that sort of meditation, you are supposed to reach those stages of consciousness which the artist intends you to, which are higher states of consciousness. So once again, Indic art, Indian art is a vehicle of jnana, is a vehicle of self-realization. So that which is meaningful, and if you point to the body, it doesn't work. If you point to the soul, it works. So, and that which elevates our consciousness. Now, this is Marcel Duchamp. Have you seen this piece of art? It's very famous. Went for like 50 crore or something. So he just put a toilet seat, inverted it, took a picture, or installation बोलते हैं आजकल, because it's neither qualifies as a painting or a sculpture or architecture. क्या है? तो उसको installation बोलते हैं. Dali का, Salvador Dali was very famous for that melting वो जो है ना melting time, melting clock. Oh, that's the only good piece, that only understandable piece that he ever created. If you see every other thing that he's created, it's absolutely something like this only. So he just inverts a toilet seat, takes a picture, and that's art. And there is an installation, and that's art. And that went for. Abhi, you must have heard of a few years ago also. I think 4 or 5 years ago. There was another such famous case. Somebody taped a banana on the wall. You know that instance, and that went for like how many millions on and then somebody ate it also 2 days later. So, and that was called art. And they have done experiments. So, scientists have done experiments on artists. One scientist just went in, this art exhibition, dropped his spectacles there, and people started interpreting it. That why is this lying here, and this is a piece of art, and there is meaning in it. And there for 3 days there were whole commentaries on it, and then they said we just dropped it, to trip you, and they did get tripped. So this is that. Their benchmark of art is it has to be strange and shocking. So what has happened, I have traced it in a series of articles. When you introduce the individual agency in art, what happens is that the moment you have introduced the individual agency, the individual always tries to make a mark for himself. If he is living by the individualist spirit, he will try to make a mark himself. The moment he does that, he will not try to conform to the tradition, he will try to differ from the tradition. How am I different? How am I new? How am I standing apart from others, from traditional artists? And the moment that series starts, at first they create some beautiful pieces. In Renaissance, this is what happened. But after that, it descends to a level where the only criteria is you have to be different, you have to be strange. Yes, sir.
Even in classical art form nowadays in India, that is happening. I want to do
Everywhere. So this is where it descended to. This is 1950s, if I am not wrong. This is not even very recent, 70, 80 years ago. So that had become, in classical music, the series in which I did, classical music had descended to a level where they were recording voices of opening and shutting doors. This was art. And pop art, on the other hand, was at least 2 out of 10 songs that they were giving were good on ears. You could sing them, you could dance on them. So-called classical art in Western, now you see the state of classical art, it's nowhere near where it was. They are doing all of these, and they call it classical because they differ it from the popular, which is at least, it's beautiful, it's musical, you can sing it, you can dance on it. So they are recording opening and shutting doors and things like that, dropping some things, crashing some things. This is, why is this not music? And so when ideology enters, when you say that it is the elitist like Brahminical patriarchy, so there also the elite, the patriarchy which has oppressed and not let the voices of the oppressed come out. So this is the voices, subaltern voices of a glass breaking or a door shutting. That subaltern door which never had its own voice now has a place in classical music in West. So that which elevates our consciousness. And here on the right hand what you have is Shiva Dakshinamurti, where he is the highest form. Here Guru and deity comes together. So it's one of the greatest, one of the most venerable forms of deities in our tradition. Because here the greatest deity, Parashiva, combines with the greatest Guru, Shiva Dakshinamurti, where he is the Guru, where he gives jnana, where he gives moksha. So there is nothing more sacred for us. And that has a great meaning. This is on the walls of Kailashnathar, Kanchipuram, one of the highest achievements of Hindu temple architecture. And every single niche has some of this vigrahas, and one of this is this. So that, 3 principles, that which is beautiful, that which is meaningful, that which elevates our consciousness. It has to elevate our consciousness. Only meaning which tells you a story, only meaning which does not elevate you or sometimes may even degrade you will not be called traditional art, good art from the Indic sense. Now, I will not go very deep into this, but I will just discuss some theory of rasa, because this is for extended lectures where we just discuss rasa and other things. So we have the concept of ras, and this is universal in our minds. They define it as emotional essence of an artwork. What is ras? The bhav that it generates in us, the feeling that it generates in us, what the resultant feeling of it is, that is rasa, to be enjoyed by a sahridaya. This is not Trimurti as it is generally mislabeled. This is in Elephanta. This is Sadashiva Shiva. 5 forms of 5 faces of Shiva. One is at the back and one is invisible. The 5th head representing 5 states of consciousness. Jagrit, Swapna, Sushupti, Turiya, Turiyatit, and Turiyatit cannot even be defined, so they generally do not draw that form there. So एक पीछे है, 3 इधर हैं, और ऐसे पंचमुखी शिव कई स्थान पर हैं. एलिफेंटा में भी that form only is depicted. It's not Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. So this is ras, when that bhav comes in you. when that elevated bhav comes in you, that becomes rasa. Natyashastras of course describe art, iconography. This is another feature of Hindu disciplines, that if you go to study one, you cannot help but study others. For example, I first got fascinated with architecture because it was monumental, it was big, it was very impressive. It gives you confidence, especially a generation which was bred on self-hate. We did nothing and we have nothing, and look at the West how they have done. When you stumble upon all of these pieces, and architecture is the first thing which gives you confidence. When I first stumbled upon Konark temple, Sun temple in Konark, oh, we could do this. If we could do this, we must not have been this bad. And that is what started me on this journey of what is Indian art. So architecture is the first thing, but what happens is that if you try to study architecture and go beyond a certain level, you cannot but help but to study sculpture, because architecture won't make sense to you beyond a point if you do not study sculpture. Now this is very different from other traditions of art. In Greece, you can separate sculpture very clearly, you can separate architecture very clearly and study them as different disciplines. That's once again also the result of the Christian evolution of understanding of the Greek art, but there are some elements in Greek art which lend themselves to this also. Here, because at certain places in Karnataka, I will tell you, I will not go deep into it, some certain parts of the temple, it is not clear, you cannot define whether they are a sculpture or architecture. They are both. They are actually a sculpture but playing the part of architecture. So what will you call it? So that's why that triggers you to understand sculpture also. And because a whole of Hindu temple, it seems like a jumble of vigrahas, jumble of sculpture. है ना, ऊपर से तो आप देखेंगे तो ऐसा लगेगा किसी ने लाखों स्कल्पचर्स बस फेंक दिए एक ढेर में वहाँ साथ में है. सो इफ यू ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड आर्किटेक्चर, स्कल्पचर से आप बच नहीं सकते. बट इफ यू ट्राई टू स्टडी स्कल्पचर, व्हाट डू दे मीन, why are they standing like this, why this pose, why this pose, and what are the hand gestures that they have, what do they mean, what are the asanas that they are sitting on, what do they mean, what are the ayudhas that they hold in their hands, what do they mean. Then you have to study iconography. Iconography is just a study of icons, a study of vigrahas, what do they mean. And the greatest in the first text which discusses iconography is actually Natyashastra. And Natyashastra by its very name is a text on dance and drama, which discusses the sacred vocabulary of Hast and Mudras. This tells you the seamlessness of Hindu disciplines. You try to study one, at least in art, and the common sacred vocabulary which passes through, permeates through all of the disciplines, which is common through all of the disciplines, it will force you to study all others. The moment you try to go deeper inside one, you will have to study another. That's the character of Hindu disciplines. So we don't need to go deep into it, that is a matter of another lecture. But these are the स्थाई bhavas, they are स्थाई and sanchari. Sanchari means अस्थाई भी आप कह सकते हैं उसको. तो रति, हास्य, शोक, क्रोध, उत्साह, भय, जुगुप्सा and विस्मय. So these are called as, and Bharat Gupta ji says कि अभी depression को भी स्थाई भाव कह देना चाहिए in this contemporary world where it's everywhere. So I do not know, but some might agree. He says that depression भी स्थाई भाव में अब ला देना चाहिए because it's so pervasive today. Now bhav se, what arises in your, the first feeling that arises spontaneously in your heart, what does it produce is rasa. And rasa is a word which is so common. See the beauty of, people say that our tradition is very difficult to understand, but on the other hand, if you just drop the formal pretense of understanding and studying something, it becomes so easy. The word rasa is everywhere in our life. So, and I have written it also, Ras is, here you are studying dance, drama, aesthetics, you know, the very height of art, and yet the word for kitchen in North India is what? Rasoi. The literal meaning is that's where the ras emerges. उसको भी रस कहा है. जब आप रसोई में पाक कला का प्रयोग करते हैं, उसमें भी रस, एंड किचन वाज नेक्स्ट टू पूजा घर इन आवर होम्स, इट वाज द मोस्ट सेक्रेड, सेकंड मोस्ट सेक्रेड प्लेस, दैट्स वेयर द रस इमर्जेस, जहां रस इमर्ज होता है. तो जब आप खाना बनाते हैं, जब आप भोजन बनाते हैं, उसमें भी वही शब्दावली का प्रयोग होता है. The same vocabulary, the same sacred vocabulary which is prevalent in all of highest of arts and sciences, the same vocabulary exists too in your daily life, and that's why it's so pervasive, that's why it's so easy. So Rati produces Shringara. We will also not go deep, हम किसी और lecture में, this is because this will take entire 2 hours. Hasya, of course, Hasya, Shok, Karuna, क्रोध produces रौद्र, उत्साह वीर, भय भयानक, जुगुप्सा, जुगुप्सा से बीभत्स, विस्मय अद्भुत, and शांत शांत. Navaras. So, and Shantras, so this is the only ras that I will discuss. So all of these different feelings and bhavas that we have, there is another ras. Now, Bharat Muni in Natya Shastra does not discuss Shantaras. Shantaras is what in later commentaries it comes. So he only discusses 8. So Bharat Gupji says ki it's not that he does not believe or does not talk about Shantaras, but that is the entire concept of, just like people say about moksha, ki pehle to text mein moksha nahi tha, baad mein aaya. But moksha is so pervasive, so always present, that earlier texts didn't think it important to mention moksha. Later texts, when it becomes less obvious to people, when their chitta becomes more impure, then it becomes more obvious. Same here with Shantras. The purpose of all of the ras is ultimately get to Shantras, and that would be an equivalent of the state of self-realization. So that's the goal of all art. Very technically they have said कि 8 रस जो हैं, 8 रस से जब आप नव रस पे आते हैं, नवे रस पे आते हैं, that is where you have reached the very purpose of art, and which is Shantras, which is equivalent of being in the state of Brahma or being in the state of self-realization. अब mudras, how to express bhavas, we'll very हमको deep नहीं जाना है, but अभय, ये हाथ के gesture से अलग-अलग आप one of the most common gestures that you will find in Hindu deities and also Buddhist deities, Abhay and Varad, आपको बाउंटी दे रहे हैं और प्रोटेक्ट कर रहे हैं कि डू नॉट फियर. एंड जो श्री लक्ष्मी जी जो हम बहुत मोस्ट फेमिलियर हैं, दिवाली पे पैसे बरसाती हैं, ऐसे जो हम पोस्टर आर्ट में वी हैव ऑल बीन वर्शिपिंग दैट एवर सिंस आवर चाइल्डहुड्स, तो वो जो है वरद, उसमें से लेटर आर्टिस्ट ने उसमें से धन भी निकाला, बट वो वरद है कि आपको बहुत प्रॉस्पेरिटी दी, दूसरा अभय दिया. सो व्हाट टू नीड्स, इफ कोई जिन अपीयर हो और कोई देवता अपीयर हो, and if you were to ask for 2 boons, the most is we let us be without any fear and let us give all prosperity. So 2 most common gestures that we have, the deities will have, Abhay and Varad. And then Anjali Mudra, Chin Mudra, Kartri Mudra, and very several mudras are there. So there is an entire science. David Frawley has edited a book written by someone else on Has and Mudras, very good, you can consult that. Now, the same mudras that you see in sculpture and painting, this is not something archaic. This is not something people 1400 years ago only used to study and used to make. Today, if an artist would dance, she would make the same sort of gestures, same sort of hasta mudras that are there given in Natya Shastra. And Natya Shastra, if anything, at least is 2100 years old, at least if you are making a very conservative estimate also. So even then, these mudras that were prevalent, and this is the continuity of Indian tradition, mind you. We talk about continuity, we talk about how we are the only surviving civilization, though I would say China is also another great surviving civilization. But when we talk about India as continuous, it means that the meaning of these symbols which were created more than 2000 years ago are still not lost upon us. Forget being lost upon us, we still practice them. There is no greater sign of continuity of our tradition than this. Because what happens is that you create symbols according to, for example, 4 friends, they have a certain slang between them which goes on, certain incidents which happen, certain words that they started speaking. Now beyond those 4 people it becomes meaningless, and when they stop using it, by the time of their children, to them it won't make any sense. So when symbols lose their meaning in a civilization, that means that continuity has broken. They have not been able to transfer the meaning to that generation, and now they need either new symbols or new beginning. But here this tells you that, sorry, this tells you that abhi apne aap change ho raha hai. Oh, I think it got some energy. So when this happens, then you can see that great continuity is there in our tradition. There is no, in art I see no greater sign than this, that our tradition is as continuous as it ever was. Now Ayodhya's divine attributes of the deities. These are some of the few most common of the Khadag hai, Gada hai, Khetak hai, Shankh hai, Chakra hai. तो ये दिस इज थोड़े से अनरिकग्नाइजेबल इसलिए भी होंगे, ये टी ए गोपीनाथ राव का वेरी फेमस वर्क है. इज टेकन मोस्टली फ्रॉम द कर्नाट द्रविड़ ट्रेडिशन. This is how you would find these ayodhas drawn or depicted on the walls of Karnataka temples. So in north it would be a slightly different representation, but it's the same. And then through the combination. So, Abhi, a Hindu always finds how do you, if he is in architecture, he will find more and more surfaces to make a sculpture on. In a sculpture, he will find more and more surfaces to represent more and more forms and attributes of a deity. So, abhi kya hai? You have 4 hands. Suppose if you are depicting Vishnu with 4 hands. 4 hands hai, 4 ayut de diye, 4 weapons de diye. Now you make a permutation of these. So, Chaturvanshati Vishnu, Shankha, Chakra, Gada, Padma, 4 weapons, 4 hands. Now you rotate them and you have 24 forms. And every form has a different name, every form has a different attribute. And all over Karnataka Dravid tradition, you will find this Chaturvanshati Vishnu, one over another. Different names of Vishnu, but meaning different Chittabhumis, different meanings, different attributes. So, this is a wonderful depiction. पूरे इंडिया में यूज होता है, बट इन साउथ इट इज सर्वाइव मोर देन इन द नॉर्थ एंड साउथ. This 24 forms is more prevalent. In north, the Dashavatar form is more prevalent. In south, the 24 forms is more prevalent. And combinations of these mudras, convey attitudes, represent different forms of deities. So, different deities, if you see the face in a Pallava temple, if you see the face of Shiva, if you see the face of Vishnu, face, you won't be able to recognize who is Vishnu and who is Shiva just by looking at the face. You have to see what Mukuta, what Ayodhas, what Asanas, and what Vahana, what vehicle that they are using, that will tell you which deity and which form of that deity. Here another famous, this is Pal art, and Bengal used to be this before the Islamic invasions. This is Pal, this is around 1000 years old, 1100 years old. Bengal used to be this. Now not a single temple survives intact which can depict these kind of sculptures. The Ahom temples that you see in Assam now and Bengal, the newer temples of all Shakta temples that you see are recreations after the destruction, after the first, second, third waves of destruction. So if you study architecture, the greatest loss anywhere you see is not even in Kashmir, because Kashmir you see ruins of at least 17 to 18 temples. Martand is not just one, there are 17 to 18 temples that survive of that tradition. But if you go to Bengal and Assam, not even a single example survives. The destruction was so absolutely complete there. In painting too, combination of mudras and hastas are used to convey another form of Mahishmardini that you see here. This is Patichitra, so different traditions also all over India, where different traditions of paintings are there. Another charge that they put on us, the West, that Indians don't know how to paint. So if you see, Greeks have realistic paintings, Indians have very unrealistic paintings. But once again, if the purpose of art is to give meaning to it and to elevate the viewer to a certain level, realism will not be your focus. Because, and today's, what has happened in the West, the crisis in the Western art is, realism has lost all purpose after camera. Why should I depict even every single hair exactly like it is if I can click a picture and show you? So what's the purpose? This is what happened in cinema with the novelists, realistic novels. When you can make a movie of 2 hours and people can watch it in 2 hours, what's the point of reading a 500 pages book? The book has to have a special purpose where it elevates you to another level. And similarly, so the crisis that they went through and the stupidity of Indian artists today is that they are mimicking trends in Western art which never the problems, they are mimicking solutions to the problems in Western art which never existed in India. That's why it is important to understand what is the concept of Indic art. If you do, you will not need to mimic those, and you will not be those mimic monkeys and mimicking some, absolutely you saw that inverted toilet and all, and we are also doing all of those things. And so there is this art part, but also there is a strict science part to this. Talman means Hindu iconometry. How do you measure and make all the vigrahas? So when you go to a temple, it's not arbitrary. The vigraha at the center in the Garbhagriha will be made in a very different proportion. The vigrahas that are on 3 sides of the temple, outside walls, will be very different. The vigrahas of Ashtadikpalas, the smaller deities, chamar bearers, and the attendants of the deities, they will be very different. There is a strict scale given in the Shastras how to do that. And once again, this used to be the practice. And then these texts came. So, उसमें इनसे आपको variations भी मिलेंगे. If you go to fields, I've been to more than 1600 of these temples. I have found countless examples which are not mentioned in any Shastra. So we also differed. It's a very wrong image of Indian artists that we only drew and only created, remained within certain boundaries. We not violated, but we practiced constructive creativity wherever there was scope and wherever there was meaning for it. So this is proportions are given. पैर कितना अगर dt हैं, कौन से dt हैं, वो dt कहाँ बनाए जा रहे हैं, उनके कैसे proportions होने चाहिए. All of this is given very in detail in Hindu texts, a lot of these texts. And ऐसे 10 तल, सप्ततल, नवतल, सप्ततल, पंचतल ऐसे measurements होते हैं कि अगर कोई आप जैसे जैन टेम्पल में if you are making Mahavir or making Rishabdev, then how should he be depicted? If you are making some attendant deities, how should they be depicted? Saraswati को कैसे depict करेंगे? All of these measurements are there. So for example, you must also be familiar, एक विष्णु खड़े हैं, पास में attendants हैं, attendants इतने से हैं. So they are not telling you that कि इतने छोटे बौने होते हैं या giants होते हैं, but this is a way, how do you represent, how does an artist represent in a certain very limited panel one dt and at least 17-18 other figures. So this is the artistic way of representing, and there is a whole science to it, measurement science to it. Now this is bhanga. How do you break the posture of your body? That also displays in which mudra you are in. For example, abhang and sabhang. This is when you pose, when you convey a very sattvic attitude, then abhang or sambhang will be there. Abhang meaning it's not violated, it's not broken. Sambhang is broken but in one line, but that's also a representative of abhanga. And sambhang is of two types. Then there is tribhang. Tribhang is generally when somebody is in posture of relaxation. For example, Shiv is with Parvati, then he is in tribhang. So head ऐसा होगा, body एक tilt करेगी, head इस direction में, body इस direction में, and फिर legs फिर इस direction में. That's a posture of relaxation. विलास का जब posture होता है, क्योंकि जब वो अपने सपत्नीक होते हैं तो वो विलास के posture में होंगे, and that will be broken. So that is a posture of विलास. And अति भंग, जब नटराज हैं, जब डांस कर रहे हैं तो अति भंग है, 3 से अधिक भंग है आपके शरीर के, हाथ कहीं जा रहा है, पैर कहीं जा रहा है. It's not arbitrary, once again it is thought about, but that is called as अति भंग. तो हृदय की कौन सी मुद्रा, which feeling of the heart it is conveying, it is generally conveyed by what bhangas it is in. Then आसन, of course, योगासन, पद्मासन, स्वस्तिकासन, ऐसे बहुत सारे आसन होते हैं. So once again, what asan you are sitting in, what vehicle you are using, what bhang your body is in, what mudra your hast is showing, and what ayudhas your hands are holding, and what headdress you are wearing, that decides the bhav and form of the deity. So there is a whole science to it. I think I have taken more time than, how much time do I have? 10-15 minutes, okay. So metaphors of Indian art, we will pass through quickly some basic metaphors that are very prevalent and very pervasive all through Indian art. Some of the most basic are Bij, the seed. Yesterday also we discussed about seed, that how Hindu mind thinks about, Indic mind thinks about going after the seed. So this is all over art. For example, the cosmic seed, Brahm of the cosmic consciousness. The universe comes from, of course, this seed, this consciousness, and our texts also say that. So that's why the seed, the image of the seed is very prevalent. Then there is the image of Hiranyagarbha. Bij ka bhi, we are not discussing architecture here, but this part we can study. This is the Kalash of the temple. This is an Odia temple. That there at the top is a Kalash. Now Kalash is not meaningless. Kalash is not just there for a form. Inside the Kalash there is a small cot. It's hollow. On that small cot there is Navagraha. Those Navagrahas are the sign of the seed. So एक उस कलश में एक seed होता है. अब वो seed क्यों है? There is another seed underground. When you see in the Garbhagriha in any temple, Garbhagriha is at the dead center, Brahmasthan of that piece of land. So at the center is Garbhagriha, at very center of it is the Vigraha of the Pradhan deity. Under the deity, underground, there is another Kalash. One Kalash you see at the top. One Kalash which you cannot see is underground, and it also has the Navagraha, it also has the seed. So what's happening here? This Kalash is the sign of the Supreme Consciousness. And that Kalash, beneath the deity, under the deity, is the sign of that individual consciousness of the deity. When darshan takes place, when Archak invokes the deity, what is supposed to happen is what we call technically in Diksha a Shaktipat, the descent of consciousness. And then Shakti descends from above through that seed, which is at the top, and the individual consciousness, which is underground, it rises from there. In the Vigraha, they both meet. And that moment when you have darshan, that is the act of darshan. In Dhyan also, that is what happens. When you use the terminology of chakras, that is exactly what it is. Shakti descends from Sahasrara, helps and takes someone from who is in Mooladhara or some higher chakras and pulls it above. And that is the ascent and descent of consciousness. Entire Hindu sciences, entire Hindu disciplines are based on this same imagery, one imagery. The various forms of this imagery only, they are ascent and descent of consciousness. What is world? The world has descended from above, consciousness has created all matter. So, all of us have descended from one point, one consciousness, and self-realization is what? The attempt to raise ourselves back to the level, जिस सीढ़ी से हम नीचे आए हैं, उसी से हम ऊपर चढ़ेंगे. And to raise ourselves to the highest level is the act of self-realization. And the seed, the analogy of seed, and which is very potent in Hindu temple architecture, which is used to convey this only. In language also, it is said that most of the languages or most of entire structures spring from Bij mantras. So once again, the analogy in our civilization again and again is, it's not an evolution of material into consciousness, it's a descent from consciousness into matter and all of existence. And again, the indestructibility of the seed. Most of the Puranic stories are also about that, कि पूरा प्रलय आ गई, पूरा सब कुछ हो गया और सब नीचे चला गया. But if you just preserve the seed, वराह अवतार का भी इसी प्रकार से similar representation. Then tree and stump are very, very popular in our Indic consciousness. Mount Meru is considered the cosmic pillar. So, for example, if you go in temple, the shikhar of the temple is considered as Mount Meru. Mount Meru is the temple of self-realization. If you climb, symbolically, if you climb the temple, you are supposed to be climbing the mountain of self-realization. So, once you reach the top, it is not a physical mountain. Every mountain is Mount Meru in that sense. If you take it as that, every temple, the shikhar of the temple is Mount Meru in that sense. Pillars in stupa, pillars are very common, and pillars are also thought of as those agencies through which we climb to higher states of consciousness. So in Hindu, in our mandapas, the pillars are very important. And so the pillars are everywhere. This is from Veer Narayan Temple, Belawadi. 108 pillars are there. And the famous thing which you would have heard, कि हर pillar अलग है, left turn है, and every pillar is different. And sacred mountains are also seen as pillars. For example, in the famous story of Shiv Purana, I guess, and in other Puranas also, where Shiv is seen as an stamba, infinite stamb, where there is no beginning, no end, and Brahma and Vishnu try to find the ends, and Vishnu recognizes that there is no end. So that's why he is worshipped. Brahma lies that he found the end, so he is not worshipped. But there is the end of the story is that there is no end to that. It's an infinite pillar. So Mount Kailash, all of the Kailashas, they are considered as a stump only. Mountain and stump are interchangeable. Sacred Arunachala is the representation of that story, Puranic story, in this form. Temple Viman is considered a pillar, a form of a pillar and also a mountain. Temple शिखर is the स्तंभ or tree. और tree का symbolism बहुत deep है, मैं यहाँ discuss कर लेता हूँ. Banyan tree is considered the most sacred. Why? It is overdone after Dabur and all. It's overdone in our, because when we design logos and all, and everyone suggests, it seems to be like Hindu urges always use the banyan tree, always use the banyan tree. But it's overused, so वो tree का हमेशा वो रहता ही है. But why is it banyan tree so important? There are other trees also, but banyan is the most potent symbol of the tree. There is a seed, the tree becomes big, and then the roots drop from above, then they become individual trees themselves. So that same tree is infinitely, it's always alive. It never dies. And the symbolism here is ascent and descent of consciousness. When you see that root taking root and it becoming a tree, it's not clear whether it's a tree which has expanded or a root which has descended from above and become a tree. That is why it is both, it represents ascent and descent of consciousness most potently. That's why the banyan tree is so different. For example, and that is a Hindu tradition, at any moment in my own life, whenever I thought that I have stumbled upon something new, in my arrogance. In 1 year, I would remember that this is what my guru has already said and already told me, and it might be his voice which had been reverberating in my head, which according to my yoga, I attributed my agency to it. So that's like a banyan tree. I stumble upon new trees and think this is a tree that I have found, and if you just trace it, you will trace it back to your guru, back to the tradition. That's why banyan tree is such a potent symbol of our tradition. We don't have much time to go deep into this, so this is 2 lectures consumed to 1 also. But Purush of Sankhya ho gaya. Sankhya humne abhi, I was not there, but I thought in Delhi we heard a beautiful presentation on Sankhya. So this is Purush is the ultimate principle and Prakriti is the ultimate manifestation. That's how we have seen across this imagery. Vastu Purush ka bhi, jab pehli baar when I picked up the book of Stella Kremrish, ironically, but one of the few rare foreigners who have understood Hindu tradition very beautifully, Hindu temple, her book, and when I picked up that book, 2 volumes, I thought she would be explaining temple after temple, you know, monumental architecture, beautiful this pillar, that wall, beautiful sculpture. And she opens up in first 200 pages, she is only describing ritual and figures like this. Now this is not a real map. This Stella Kremrish, the Hindu temple. Motilal Banarsidas have published. Kremrish, Kramrisch, German. Entire career in last 50-60 years, Hindu temple में जो Westerners लिख रहे हैं, it's to deconstruct Stella Kremrish. That she got influenced by Brahminical patriarchs and the Hindu temple. So the entire careers, people have built entire careers to dismantle Stella Kremrish, abhi tak nahi kar paaye hain. Her book is still the standard, and she has gotten the core because she starts on 200 pages. Ritual kya hai, meaning kya hai. This is the representative map. How a temple is. This is a Brahmasthan, and all these deities exist at all different places. Basically, when you clear a piece of land to create a temple, you are disturbing the forces of nature there. So basically, when you cut a jungle, of course you have disturbed the spirits there. So the concept is that the Vastu Purush gets angry, the spirit of that place gets angry. And so what you have to do, through ritual you have to pacify them. So all of these deities, when you invoke them, they come down one by one, sit down on the Vastu Purush and hold him down. And that is why that kshetra is held and nothing untoward happens. Recently there was an incident few years ago in Dhara Devi in Uttarakhand. Temples are built like this. They are literally, वो बांधते हैं उसको, वो बाढ़ को बांध, वो देवी का कार्य ही यही था, वो क्षेत्रपालक थी वहाँ के, to hold off all these floods. The movement within hours, 6 hours when they moved, within 6 hours when they moved that Vigra for renovation. So the priest denied, no, please don't do it. She has to sit here, and then engineers removed. When that removed, within 6 hours, one of the worst floods in the history of Uttarakhand happened. I think thousands of people died. Billions of dollars of destruction, thousands of people died. It was there. So this is the basic concept. If you start Hindu temple, you don't start by counting kitne pillar, kitne parts, kaun sa hai. The Westerners are very good at it. And mind you, it's not wrong to do that. It's good to be thorough. It's good to be scientific in your approach. But what is more important is, what is the meaning of this? This is the meaning. This is the more important map that you will come across, and not the real map of a temple, that where is a pillar, where is Garbhagriha, where is Mandapam. And so this imagery of Purush reverberates through all disciplines. Now this Purush has nothing to do with gender. Purush is the principle here. And by reflecting in this, there is Sankhya Purush, there is Vastu Purush, there is Natya Purush, Sangeet Purush, Shilpa Purush, concept of Pind and Brahman, that the entire universe is reflected in a certain principle. From that principle, entire manifestation comes out. That is the concept of Purush. Nabi, where the universe converges. Nabi is the center. Vastu Purush का भी आपने मैप देखा, वो नाभि है, ब्रह्म स्थान में उनका नाभि है, where the entire universe converges. So this is a cycle of our symbolism, some of the most potent symbols. From beach emerges tree, tree becomes pillar, pillar becomes mountain, mountain in a way is Purush, Purush has a Nabi, and Nabi once again produces the Bija. So it's a cycle, like everything in Hindu concept, it's a cycle. In Ayurveda also, I'm sorry I missed the picture, Nabi is the source of Dhamnis, and it's very critical. I am not, of course, I do not know Ayurveda, but this is being told that it is the source of Dhamnis. Yagyavedi is also imagined as a Nabhi, and Yagyavedi temple Shikhar is imagined as a Yagyavedi only. The Vigraha of a temple is considered as a permanently Prajulit Agni, which is there in a Yajnavedi. Yajnavedi also, when you invoke the god, you imagine through mantra, unka jo sarup hai, which you invoke, and that's how when the deity comes and then you worship, and that's the same is true in temple. जब अर्चक उस विग्रह में अर्चना करता है, तब जाके वो जो मैकेनिज्म है एसेंट एंड डिसेंट ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस, एक तरह से वो अग्नि में देवता विराजते हैं. सो अग्नि वहां है, आपने पहले अग्नि प्रज्वलित की, वहां पर अग्नि है, अब जब उसमें देवता विराजेंगे तब जाके आप उनका पूजन करेंगे. सो द सेम दैट हैपेंस इन यज्ञ, द सेम इज व्हाट हैपेंस इन अ टेंपल. सो व्हेन दे से वेदों में टेंपल नहीं है, सो टेंपल्स आर अनहिंदू, दैट्स अ वेरी क्रिश्चियन थिंग टू से, बिकॉज वी डोंट बिलीव इन कि कोई प्योर स्टेट थी वेयर वी फेल फ्रॉम, कि हमें एक प्री टेंपल स्टेज पे जाना है. वी इवॉल्व, वी चेंज, वी क्रिएट न्यू मैकेनिज्म्स, न्यू व्हीकल्स ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन ऑफ आवर कल्चर एंड आइडेंटिटी, एंड वी कीप डूइंग दिस ऑलवेज. सो दिस इज नाभि इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इन our culture, and of course this is a picture, this is a sketch of Sri Padmanabh Swami in Thiruvananthapuram. Nobody has ever taken a picture very helpfully, and they were so strict. There was a great movie, they were willing to pay crores of rupees, and they said no. So that movie actually created a replica. So something good came out of it. That replica is also worshipped, and they shot that. So the famous pictures that you would have seen of Padmanabh Swami, they are not the real temple, it's that वो मूवी सेट में उन्होंने जो विग्रह बनाया था. सो दिस ऑल्सो फ्रॉम द नाभि ऑफ विष्णु एंटायर कॉस्मोस इमर्जेस, बिकॉज दैट्स वेयर द क्रिएटर इमर्जेस. इमेजिन द, इट्स इवन सटलर देन क्रिएशन. क्रिएशन नहीं इमर्ज करता, क्रिएटर हिमसेल्फ इमर्जेस फ्रॉम द नाभि ऑफ विष्णु. एंड सिमिलरली इन वास्तु पुरुष नाभि इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. इन आइकोनोग्राफी ऑल्सो नाभि, द सेंटर पॉइंट इज वेयर यू, सारे जो भंग और जो मुद्रा है वो आप मोड़ेंगे कहां से, नाभि इज द पॉइंट वेयर यू बेंड अ फिगर. So Nabhi is very important in iconometry and iconography also. Nabhi in music also, I am told by Kumar Swami and by others also, in music, in Indian music especially, highest priority to Nabhi in voice production. And Nabhi is critical in dance too. Where you bend your posture is very critical, that this is the center around which you bend your body. Garbh, then another strong imagery is Garbh, the cosmic womb. That's why Gufa and caves, they are Guha. They are considered as great places of meditation, because that's where the Hiranyagarbha, the entire cosmos is supposed to have emerged from this possibility of a universe. So Hiranyagarbha is what? Seed is the seed of the universe, Bij is the seed of the universe. Hiranyagarbha is that possibility, that which is pregnant with a universe, with a possible universe. So that's also very potent. तो उसमें गुफा is like that Hiranyagarbha, उसके अंदर जो विग्रह है, that is like the seed of the consciousness. That's why Garbhagriha is very important. Tirupati, Chaturbhuj, Khajuraho. This is where Garbhagriha is located. In the lecture on Hindu temple, we will go deep into this, but this is only about going through it, the basics. Then chakra is very important. Dharma chakra, symbolizing Rit and circular time. So that's why the imagery of chakra is very, very potent. Everywhere there is chakra. And another important figure is square. So square and circle of Indian art are their two most potent figures. A square represents culture, where you consciously create some boundary. That's why it's artificial, because the squares don't exist in nature. And there is circle, which is considered to be the most natural form. And the greatest problem in architecture, sculpture in Indian art is, not problem, they solved it also. It's the central, you can say, skill, how to turn a circle, square into a circle. So how to rotate a square and make it a circle. In Hindu temple architecture, we'll discuss in that lecture how they have actually done that. A square garbhagriha hai, isko rotate kar karke, if you rotate it infinitely, and then it becomes a circle. So they have done jitna wo architecture mein aap realistically kar sakte hain, they have done that also. So जो culture है, जो मानवकृत है, उसको प्रकृति तक, उसकी मूल प्रकृति तक कैसे ले जाएं, that is the great problem in Indian art. Chakra in architecture, of course, the famous wheels of Konark. In Tamil Nadu, there is another temple in Arvateshwar, Chol temple, Darsuram, that also has beautiful horses and beautiful wheels. Borobudur in Indonesia, it's also like a Sri Yantra, a square and circle. So is Sanchi. Sri Yantra is also that, square and circles, it's an interplay of square and circles. Chakras in human body. All of these are subjects of different discussion, at least 10-15 minutes, but here I am just giving you a glimpse of what are the basic motives of Indian art. So chakra our human body में भी बताए जाते हैं. Mooladhara is where generally our kundalini or our spirit or our consciousness is supposed to lie, which is where we are at our most basics of desires, food, sex, and the basic desires. And once you rise in the states of consciousness, meditate, this is a posture of meditation. When you raise the levels of your consciousness, when you come to the top, that is Sahasrara. In temple also, the seed, individual seed of the temple is supposed to lie here. वो जो ऊपर वाला कलश है, that is supposed to be the Sahasrara chakra, or ascent and descent of consciousness happens between these chakras only. So Indian art is about symbols that are beautiful, meaningful, and elevating. This is where we have to end it. I will just show you two clips of two things, and through that we'll understand what it means to create Indic art. I'm sorry we cannot listen to the entire thing, but this is how a very common rendering of a very common bhajan starts. Classical bhajan it is. Shuddha Brahma Paratpar Ram. That's why I say, when Ram temple was built, and when talks of Hindu unity went, it will destroy diversity. A Ram which is the form of, and here Nam Ramayana starts with that, which is very common rendering of Ramayana. Shuddha Brahma Paratpar Ram. Which Ram? That Ram which is Brahma Sarup himself. So in that Sarup from which the entire universe descends, that cannot end diversity, that will create diversity. So that consciousness centered in that Ram will create more diversity. This is how a very common rendering of a classical bhajan starts, and I will not play it, but the ending line is Nityanand Padasthit Ram. That Ram which is situated in the highest realm of Ananda, Nityanand Padasthit Ram. So that is the Sarup of Ram that we worship. That cannot be the destroyer of diversity, that is the creator of diversity. Now why did I show you this? This is very classical, written in Sanskrit, rendered by an artist who was one of the greatest contemporary classical artists. Now we will listen to a very folk, lok song from Rajasthan. And this will be conveying the same truths that is contained in the most classical of forms. Now in all over the world, the binary between classical and vernacular is so deep that what classical would be saying, vernacular would not be saying, and what vernacular would be saying, classical would not be saying. But यहाँ लोक और शास्त्र का साम्य इतना है कि जो सत्य बहुत पढ़े लिखे, see M.S. Subbulakshmi rendering Nam Ramayana, writing Nam Ramayana, that represents what? The apex of Hindu civilization. Sanskrit knowing, Prakand Pandit, Vidwan, exuding that. But since you think that Brahminical patriarchy would prohibited that knowledge right at that level, here half of them, actually 90% of them are not Brahmins, these singers from Rajasthan. Actually a lot from other communities are also there, and they do not know Sanskrit. They have no idea of this text, they have no idea of Nam Ramayana, and here is how they start. This is has everyone heard this one? Let's do. This line is very critical. सो शी इज सिंगिंग, मीरा का भजन है, एंड उसकी मीरा का और किसी भी एक कुंवारी लड़की के विवाह होने वाला है, और उसकी माँ कह रही है तेरा राणा से विवाह कराएंगे. एंड शी ब्रेक्स आउट इन दिस सॉन्ग एंड सेड, यू वॉन्ट टू मैरी मी टू अ राणा जो बार बार मर जाएगा, जो मरेगा और फिर पैदा होगा, फिर मरेगा. तू मेरा ऐसे से ब्याह क्यों कराना चाहती है? मैं तो उससे ब्याह करना चाहती हूँ जो कभी नहीं मरता, गिरधारी से ब्याह करना चाहती हूँ. सो इमेजिन, these people are not even literate. They would never have written or read in their lives. Exuding the same philosophy. Consider the democracy of knowledge of a civilization which managed without violence to take the most abstract of knowledge and take it to every single individual in its civilization. Imagine what it takes without violence to take the same abstract philosophy and to take to the other extent. So this ability of our civilization. And now the last thing that we'll hear that shows a very different variety of folk music, once again from Rajasthan, but a very different variety, which contains another great principle of Indian art also, which is universal across all of our disciplines, including Indian art of cooking. I'll explain the meaning of first two lines. First, just let us hear this. It's a very famous folk song. So what feeling does arise in your mind when listening to this? What is the basic feeling? Basic feelings. Sadness, happiness? Joy. Now imagine this. This is a song, a newlywed, 1-year-old newlywed daughter-in-law in the desert of Rajasthan is lying in the open looking at the sky and the stars that are in it. And she suddenly develops a great hankering of going and meeting her mother and her parents. And she is lamenting in this song that रेलगाड़ी चाले वो बाबू टिकट मांगता है, उस टिकट की पैसा मेरी सास नहीं देती, मैं क्या करूं, मुझे बहुत दुख होता है. एंड देन शी वन बाय वन शी गोज टू ऑल हर इन लॉज. मेरे जेठ ने भी टिकट के लिए मना कर दिया, मेरी जेठानी ने भी टिकट के लिए मना कर दिया. एंड शी इज लेमेंटिंग, एंड दिस हु विल नॉट आइडेंटिफाई विद दिस फीलिंग? A newlywed who wants to go to her parents. So she is actually lamenting in this. And then what is the tone, what is the music of this? The beats are very joyful. It seems very counterintuitive. A westerner would say, तुमको आया नहीं समझ में, गलती हो गई. But this is not so. Whole of Indian art is to balance the bhavas until the sthayi bhava arises, until the shant rasa arrives. So even a lamentation is done in a philosophical way, in a joyous way, which absolves you. So this cathartic pain, going through pain, absolves you of that pain. Singing like this, singing the lamentation in a joyful way, makes you at least cuts half of that pain. This is the whole point of, when it comes to loka, this is the point of art. The same is there with cooking. If you see other cuisines, they are about, and they use this term in MasterChef these days, heroing an element. So heroing an element means if you are cooking a dish, then one taste should be supreme, which should come out. And Indian cooking is exactly opposite of this. We always have to balance the tastes. सारे taste रहेंगे, everything is balanced, because every taste and every element, ingredient has a side effect. To balance those side effects, it is always there, all the elements. Indian cooking is about balancing it. So when it comes to life, one element of Indian music, Indian art is to take you to the highest level. Another is also through a very different way to balance all the bhava. In this way, this very song of lamentation sung in a very joyous way, to also absolve you of your pain but bring you to a better level, not to sink you in more pain. So this is the, and it might be a radical statement, some classicists might disagree with me, but if you would hear to the classical music of Europe, it's absolutely brilliant. Not the classical music that's being done now. I'm saying Bach, Beethoven and all of those. You listen to them, but the bhav is the intensity that you're feeling about a certain emotion that will be heightened 100 times. And if you are frustrated, if you are agitated, that agitation will heighten. They are brilliant at doing it, but it will heighten. The impact of Indian music is entirely opposite. No matter what bhav you are, it will balance it. That is another great objective of Indian art, to elevate you to the highest levels of consciousness, to balance all your bhava. And balance is, in a way, what is dharma? What is one of the greatest definition of dharma? That which always balances things. Dharma is chir santulan, which always keeps trying to balance things, never going in one stream of other. And if the objective of Indian art is to achieve that, then art in that way is dharma itself. So that's where I would like to end. Thank you.